a respected doctor, a sudden death, and a prescription that kills more than pain. Nothing in Flaxborough is ever what it seems. Welcome to Mystery Parlour. I am your host, Axon. Tell me, where are you tuning in from today? I always enjoy reading your comments. Now, let's uncover the truth behind the surgeon's deadly prescription. It was a mild Thursday in Flaxborough, the sort of day when nothing of importance was expected to happen, which in that particular town was precisely when something generally did. The church clock had just struck 4, and the annual benefactor's tea was in progress at the Memorial Hall, a ritual gathering of elderly civic pride, stale sponge cake, and discreet envy. Mrs. Mabel Teetle, the mayor's wife and self-appointed guardian of all that was genteel, was supervising the placement of the jam tarts with the same strategic attention another woman might apply to a naval blockade. No, Miss Dowse. That plate is for the diabetics, she said firmly. Put those with the pink icing on the right-hand table. Dr. Hargreaves is expected, and we must not appear to encourage his temper by forcing temptation under his nose. Dr. Clement Hargreaves, general practitioner and minor local celebrity, had long ago acquired a reputation for combining medical skill with personal austerity. His patients respected him, though not necessarily with affection. His prescriptions were exact, his bills punctual, and his sympathy portioned out like cod liver oil. He had never married, though it was whispered that his reasons were professional, a phrase covering any number of moral or physical hypotheses. When he arrived that afternoon, precisely at 4:30, the room seemed to recompose itself into better posture. "Ah, doctor," trilled Mrs. Teetle, "you do us an honor, and may I say, looking remarkably well." "Thank you," said Hargreaves, as if replying to a clinical query. "The same cannot be said of your sponge, I'm afraid. It appears to have suffered from exposure." There was a polite murmur of laughter. Mrs. Teetle flushed slightly. One did not rebuke the town's only surgeon, but one might make a note to omit him from next year's tea. At the far table, Mr. Weatherby, retired station master and part-time church warden, was telling Miss Dowse that the medical profession had too many opinions and not enough patience. His voice carried as such voices are inclined to in village halls. "Mark me," he said, dunking a biscuit. "You give a man too much education, and he'll start treating other people as symptoms." Miss Dowse nodded, though her chief interest was in whether the doctor might, at last, have noticed her new mauve hat. It was during the raffle, a local institution of petty triumphs, that the small disturbance occurred. Mrs. Teetle, in her capacity as announcer, was drawing tickets from the basket when a shrill, brief cry came from the back of the hall. A cup fell. Tea splashed across the polished boards. Dr. Hargreaves was standing quite still, his face pale, eyes fixed upon the saucer in his hand. A tremor ran through him, or through the porcelain, for a moment later both he and the cup went down together. The room rippled into alarm, chairs scraping, fans fluttering. It was Miss Dowse who reached him first. Doctor, can you hear me?" No reply. Within seconds, someone had run for the telephone. Inspector Purbright, taking his late afternoon stroll along the high street, was interrupted by the arrival of Constable Sid Love, breathless and red-eared. "Sir, they say the doctor's collapsed, sir, at the Memorial Hall." Purbright sighed, the sort of sigh that acknowledged life's preference for the inconvenient. "Collapsed, has he? Very well, Love. Let us go and observe the remains of civic virtue at close quarters." By the time they arrived, the hall was half empty, its guests dispatched by Mrs. Teetle's efficient flapping of authority. On the floor, under a white tablecloth and beside an upturned chair, lay the late Dr. Hargreaves. "He's gone, sir," said Love, kneeling respectfully. "Mrs. Teetle says he just dropped like a bag of flour." Purbright bent slightly, gazing at the doctor's calm, fixed features. A sudden death, perhaps, though suddenness does not always exclude assistance. His tone was mild, almost conversational. Mrs. Teetle looked scandalized. "You mean foul play?" she whispered. Purbright smiled faintly. "I mean, Mrs. Teetle, that Flaxborough's tea parties are not usually fatal, though I suppose there's a first time for everything." He stood, smoothing his coat, and looked about the room. On one of the tables, neatly beside the raffle basket, stood a small brown bottle, unlabeled but unmistakably medical. Purbright raised an eyebrow. "Now, what an odd thing to bring to a tea." He turned to Love. "You had better fetch the pathologist, and while you're at it, see if anyone recalls what the good doctor was drinking." Love nodded and hurried out. Purbright lingered a moment, watching the sunlight slant through the high windows, turning the dust into gold. It was a lovely day for death, and an uncomfortably social one. The news of Dr. Hargreaves' sudden demise reached every corner of Flaxborough before nightfall, conveyed by the town's invisible telegraph of whispers, sighs, and the occasional embellished gasp. By 7 o'clock, the incident had already achieved a reputation for mystery. By 8, for scandal. Mrs. Teetle, recounting her ordeal to anyone who would listen, had developed a faint tremor in her left hand. "Shock," she said, though the effect improved considerably when an audience was present. "I was right beside him, Inspector," she told Purbright later, that evening when he returned to the hall to supervise the removal of the body. "He took his tea quite black, you know. He always did for his health. And I'm certain he had only 1 cup. "Only one?" Purbright asked gently, inspecting the cups and saucers still littering the table. "And who poured it?" Mrs. Teetle hesitated. "Well, Miss Dowse was helping with the urns, though I did notice she seemed rather flustered at the time. You see, the raffle tickets had gone astray." Purbright nodded slowly. "Raffle tickets can be quite disturbing things." He was examining the small brown bottle he had noticed earlier. It had been collected and labelled by the constable, and now sat on the edge of the table under a handkerchief. "This wasn't part of your tea service, I take it." Mrs. Teetle drew back as if from contagion. "Certainly not, Inspector. That looks like one of the doctor's own bottles. He carried those everywhere, drops and tonics and such. You never knew what was in them." Purbright inclined his head, his expression neutral. "And yet, one supposes, he did." She looked puzzled, but Purbright had already turned away. The coroner's van had arrived. The stretcher men moved with quiet efficiency. The sight of a once formidable man now reduced to a respectfully covered shape seemed to settle upon the room like dust after a collapse. By the following morning, the High Street was buzzing with theories. At the post office, Mrs. Crick marveled that anyone so healthy-looking could simply drop dead. "He was the picture of good living," she declared, while weighing out stamps. "Never touched spirits, never smoked. Too clean for his own good, perhaps." At the butcher's, it was generally agreed that such men, being unaccustomed to the pleasures of life, died from lack of practice. The grocer's assistant, meanwhile, whispered darkly about medical experiments. It was astonishing how quickly a respectable practitioner could become an alchemist in the public imagination once safely beyond rebuttal. Inspector Purbright, however, was less occupied with imagination than with sequence. He sat in his office at the station, reading the preliminary medical report. The cause of death was not yet declared, but the pathologist's notes contained 2 phrases that drew his interest: bitter taste residue and trace of alkaloid compound, possibly digitalis. Purbright folded the paper carefully, as though to prevent it escaping. His sergeant, Love, stood at the door, cap in hand. "Funny thing, sir," Love said. "Miss Dowse came in this morning, said she couldn't rest without telling us something. Claims the doctor looked queer before he took his tea." "Queer in what sense?" "She said he kept patting his pocket and looking round, like he'd lost something." Purbright leaned back. Did she say whether he found it? No, sir. She reckoned he stopped fussing. Once he'd sat down, then he took the cup and, well, that was that. Purbright considered this, his fingers steepled. And the cup itself? Sent off for testing. The pathologist'll have it by now. Good. Purbright smiled faintly. It's never wise to underestimate crockery. He rose, putting on his hat. Come along, love. Let's call on Miss Dowse before her conscience finds something new to confess. Miss Dowse lived in a narrow house on Bridge Street, its front garden dominated by geraniums and an aging cat. She received them with fluttering hands and watery eyes. It's been dreadful, Inspector. I keep seeing him there. One moment upright, the next. She shuddered delicately. Purbright accepted the offered seat and waited. People in distress, he knew, would speak eventually, though often in circles first. I can't imagine who'd wish him harm, she continued, unless it was someone at the hospital, or perhaps Mrs. Teetle. She never liked being corrected in public, and the doctor could be forthright. Purbright allowed himself a small, non-committal sound. He was known to prescribe economy, I believe, in both speech and sentiment. Miss Dowse nodded eagerly. Yes, and he was very strict about his medicine. He told me once that only he and his housekeeper knew where he kept his personal mixtures. Ah, said Purbright softly. Housekeeper. That would be Mrs. Larkin, I think. Yes, poor woman. She's been with him for years. You might say she ran the practice. When they left, Love muttered, She talks like she's trying to remember what she's supposed to forget. Purbright smiled. An accurate diagnosis, Love. We'll pay Mrs. Larkin a visit. The doctor's household may be more instructive than his patients. At Hargreaves's residence, a prim, detached house facing the park. The curtains were drawn. Mrs. Larkin, a spare, grey figure, met them at the door. You'll be here about the doctor, she said flatly. I've told the coroner all I can. Purbright removed his hat. I'm sure you have, but perhaps you can indulge us a few more details. Miss Dowse mentioned the doctor carried his own medicines. She hesitated. He did. He mixed some himself, said the chemists were careless. And yesterday, did he take anything unusual? Her eyes shifted. He prepared something that morning, said it was a tonic for his nerves. Purbright studied her face for a moment longer than comfort allowed. And where might that tonic be now? She looked toward the study door. Still in there, I suppose. Purbright's gaze followed hers. Then perhaps we'd better have a look. It's remarkable how often tonics prove stronger than their makers expect. Mrs. Larkin's hands trembled as she led the way, and Purbright, stepping into the study's still air, wondered, not for the first time, whether in Flaxborough death ever arrived entirely by accident. Mrs. Larkin's fingers worried at her spectacle chain as she turned the key in the study door. The room had neatness that expected obedience. Polished desk, regimented books, a calendar fixed to yesterday. A medicinal odor lay above the polish. Love sniffed and coughed. Where would the doctor have kept his preparations? Purbright asked. In there, Mrs. Larkin said, pointing to a glass-fronted cabinet. Top shelf for his own remedies. Lower shelves a reference. 8 brown bottles stood in a wooden rack, labels neat as collar studs. Tonic, sleep, stomach, nerves, each dated and initialed. CH1 space was empty. Do you keep an inventory? She indicated a ledger. I write down what he mixes. He didn't trust the chemist's reading, and he trusted my memory only if it had pages. Love read aloud. Monday, nerve drops, digitalis tincture. Tuesday, stomach mixture. Wednesday, nothing. Thursday morning, tonic, gentian with quinine. The tonic bottle should be there, Mrs. Larkin said. It is, said Purbright, touching the amber liquid. He lifted another, near colorless, labeled nerves. Miss Dowse told us the doctor seemed to have mislaid something before tea. Did he travel with any of these? He carried a small bottle for emergencies. The nerve drops. On a lower shelf, one bottle bore no label, only a gummy outline. Purbright smelt, then replaced it. Washing spirit for the thermometer, Mrs. Larkin said quickly. May we see his coat from yesterday? From a whole cupboard she produced a tweed jacket. In the inner pocket lay a handkerchief and a tiny corked vial wrapped in a torn leaflet. Flaxborough and District Benevolent Fund, annual tea. He meant to leave that on the surgery desk, she said. Street drafts make old ladies faint. Purbright uncorked, sniffed, recorked. Same scent as the cabinet, only franker. Love shifted. Pathologist mentioned an alkaloid. Digitalis would answer. On the desk calendar, an entry for the previous night read, 7:30, Mr. Blount, Chem. In a blunter hand, someone had added, account. Blount is our chemist. The only man rash enough to question the doctor's quantities, said Mrs. Larkin. Purbright's finger traced a pale rectangle on the blotter where something had stood and been removed. What left this? His hospital photograph, she replied. He took it down last week. It is in the bottom drawer. Love opened it. Face down lay the photograph, a small velvet box, and an envelope addressed in a woman's hand. Dr. Clement Hargreaves, private. It came by the second post yesterday, Mrs. Larkin said. He had no time before he went out. We shall resist curiosity until a warrant removes the virtue from it, said Purbright. He breathed upon the picture glass. A faint smear flowered. Powder from a glove not lately washed. Grease, suggested Love. If Grease wore violets, said Purbright. Had the doctor quarrelled with anyone? She hesitated. Strong men quarrel by refusing to hear. He refused Mr. Blount. He refused Councillor Teetle. He refused nearly everyone by taking his own advice. Purbright sealed the vial in a bag. Keep the study as it is. The day brightened with that cheerfulness peculiar to mornings after death. As they walked to Blount's pharmacy, Love asked, Do we think the tea was the instrument, sir, or his own bottle? People seldom poison themselves in company unless making a point, said Purbright. Blount's pharmacy smelt of polish and chemicals. Mr. Blount, compact, sleek-haired, offered the sadness of a tradesman. You had an appointment, Purbright observed. Your word account appears in his calendar. Blount's eyelids compressed. We disagreed over private compounds. He disliked to be questioned. I disliked to be bullied. The sum is trifling, the principle less so. And he failed to attend? A note came asking for time. I am tolerant within rules. Purbright set the bagged vial on the counter. Your nose, if you please. Blount sniffed. Digitalis tincture. There's a resentful bitterness beneath, enough to quarrel with tea. Unless one trusted the poorer, said Purbright. Who in town buys gloves they do not wear out? Mrs. Teetle purchases gloves as other ladies purchase opinions. And what would mask bitterness without announcing murder? Citrus, clove, peppermint. In the street, Love ventured. Do you think the mayor's wife poured his tea? I think she poured many people's, said Purbright. Whether his cup was singled out is another matter. The cup will speak, and perhaps the envelope will explain why a portrait lost its place. At the station, a message awaited. The pathologist confirmed digitalis in the cup and, faintly, on the doctor's lips. Purbright read and folded it as if it bruised. So, he said, the tea spoke, and not kindly. What next, sir? We shall listen to those who were closest without seeming to speak at all. He checked the clock. Mrs. Teetle keeps a mourning for civic virtue. Let us interrupt it gently. The Teetles' residence, a substantial brick affair with ambitions above its mortar, presented a front of civic virtue softened by lace curtains and the faint scent of lavender polish. Mrs. Teetle received Inspector Purbright in her drawing-room with the same air of restrained martyrdom she might display toward a persistent tradesman. Councillor Teetle hovered nearby, a stout man whose complacency was permanently upholstered into his waistcoat. "Inspector," Mrs. Teetle began, hands folded, "I can scarcely believe this dreadful. Business has reached the point of visiting respectable homes. I told your constable everything, that poor Dr. Hargreaves simply collapsed, and that I, being chairwoman of the event, was naturally preoccupied with the raffle." Purbright inclined his head. "Indeed. Yet, as it happens, we've reason to think the doctor's tea may not have been innocent. I am therefore inquiring, quietly, how that cup came to his hand." Mrs. Teetle blinked. "You mean poisoned?" Her husband gave a low whistle. "Good Lord, Mabel, I told you that man had enemies." "Enemies?" Purbright asked mildly. "Professional sort," said Teetle, crossing to the hearth. "Refused to sign a petition, reported a councillor over a building inspection, that sort of thing. Hargreaves wasn't a man for compromise." "And you, councillor, were you one of those inspected?" Teetle flushed. "As chairman of works, I'm inspected all the time, Inspector. Comes with the office." Mrs. Teetle's hand fluttered in annoyance. "If you're suggesting—" "I'm suggesting nothing," said Purbright with polite calm. "Merely building a picture. Did either of you happen to serve the doctor his cup?" "Certainly not," Mrs. Teetle said crisply. "Miss Dowes was handling the urn. I only recall passing by when he joined the table." "And you didn't notice whether he had his little medicine bottle with him?" "The horrid thing. He placed it right beside the sugar bowl. I told him it might upset the more nervous guests. He said it was a harmless tonic, but his tone was positively mocking. I think he enjoyed contradicting me." "Ah." Purbright's eyes wandered to the mantelpiece, where a framed photograph of the couple smiled in stiff formality beside a silver presentation clock. The doctor's manner could be unkind, perhaps. Mrs. Teetle hesitated. "He was a man who found pleasure in discomfort. Other people's, that is." "Yet you still invited him?" "It would have been noticed if I hadn't." "That," Purbright said softly, "is the truest summary of civic duty I've heard in years." Teetle chuckled, uncertain whether it was safe too. "You've the measure of my wife, Inspector." "I suspect she's rather too much the measure of the town," Purbright replied. When they left, Love muttered, "I'd wager she knows more than she said, sir." Purbright adjusted his hat. "So would she. Which is why she said just enough to sound blameless." They walked through the high street, where the shutters were still half drawn against the morning glare. The chemist's boy was sweeping his doorway, humming tunelessly. In the shop window, a modest display of cough remedies shared space with an advertisement for gloves. "Ladies and gents. Reduced for Civic Week." Purbright stopped, studying the gloves. "Love, do you recall what Mrs. Teetle was wearing at the, tea?" "Cream gloves," said Love promptly. "Short ones. Looked brand new." "Cream," murmured Purbright. "They stain easily, yet I saw none on her when we arrived at the hall. Either she has a miraculous laundry method or she changed them. You think she poured the tea after all?" "I think she may have poured it without meaning to, or with rather more meaning than she claims." He smiled faintly. "Still, a gentleman's recollection of a lady's gloves is not evidence. We must be patient until the chemist confirms whether the residue on that cup matches the doctor's own tincture." By afternoon, the report arrived. The digitalis in the cup was pure and unadulterated. Not the doctor's diluted preparation, but the concentrated form used for experiments and precise dosing. Someone, it seemed, had access to the same source Hargreaves himself possessed. Purbright sat in his office, staring out at the slow drift of pedestrians in the square. The church bell struck 2. "Love," he said, "do we know who besides the doctor had keys to his surgery?" "Just Mrs. Larkin, though she says the chemist delivered by appointment." "Then let's verify that delivery." Blount received them with the irritation of a man repeatedly summoned to perform the same moral test. "I've already said I supplied nothing unlabeled. The doctor mixed his own, but he paused, watching Purbright closely. If someone had access to the surgery cabinet, they'd find a bottle marked concentrated extract. I supplied it last month by special order. For his own use? Or for someone else's? Said Blount, shrugging. I only deliver. He was particular that it be charged to his private account. Outside, Love said, so the poison came from his own shelf. Apparently. Which raises an odd question, Love. Who in Flaxborough would dare use a surgeon's instruments against him, and who would know precisely which bottle to choose? They walked in silence until Purbright halted at the corner where the church path forked toward the surgery and the hall. Mrs. Larkin told us something useful without meaning to. She said the doctor prepared something that morning for his nerves. If the same bottle went missing, it might have been replaced before she returned. You mean someone switched it? Perhaps. A small adjustment of labels, a changed cork, nothing obvious. He carried the bottle to the hall, thinking it his usual draught. But if he took a sip before the tea, he might have felt the bitterness and set it aside. Love frowned. Then the poison wasn't in the tea at all? Not necessarily. Yet it reached him through something he trusted. And in Flaxborough, Love, trust is a rarer substance than arsenic. They reached the station again as dusk folded over the rooftops. Purbright paused by the window, his reflection merging with the dimming town beyond. Somewhere among those tidy lives, someone had measured a dose with steady hands and steady nerves. He thought of Mrs. Teetle's composure, Miss Dowse's trembling conscience, and Mrs. Larkin's wary eyes. Each seemed to know a little too much about the habits of the late Dr. Hargreaves, and about each other. Tomorrow, Purbright said almost to himself, we'll see who profits most from a man's sudden silence. The following morning brought a polite drizzle that lent the town a washed, reflective air, as if Flaxborough itself were considering its part in recent events. Inspector Purbright, never one to resent the weather, took his umbrella and walked to the surgery once more. He preferred to arrive unannounced. People were most truthful before they had the chance to tidy their emotions. Mrs. Larkin opened the door before he knocked. Her eyes were rimmed red, though whether from tears or sleeplessness was uncertain. "Inspector, you've been here so often, you might as well sign the appointment book," she said, attempting a brittle smile. "Consistency is a virtue in investigation as well as medicine," Purbright replied. I wondered whether the doctor's records had been examined yet. His ledgers, appointment lists, that sort of thing. They're all in the filing cabinet. Nothing's been moved. She led him down the corridor, her shoes whispering against the polished floor. "It's strange," she added, "how the house still smells of him. I keep expecting to hear his tread." Purbright glanced at her. "You were fond of him." "Fond?" She considered the word as though it had been newly introduced to her vocabulary. "Not exactly, but I'd worked here 15 years. You get used to someone's ways even when they're not kind." He stopped beside the cabinet. Was he unkind? She hesitated, then shrugged. Not to hurt, to remind. He liked people to know their place. Purbright nodded and began leafing through the ledgers. The entries were neat, disciplined, with the doctor's tight handwriting. Then, in the ledger marked private accounts, a newer entry caught his eye. Donation, benevolent fund, $50. It was dated 3 days before the tea. "Generous man," he murmured. Mrs. Larkin snorted softly. "Generous? He gave that to stop the mayor's committee asking for more. Said it was cheaper than attending their meetings." Purbright smiled faintly and closed the book. "Tell me, Mrs. Larkin, the doctor's key cabinet, where did he keep it?" "In his desk drawer, the right-hand one." "Was it locked?" "It always was. But after the police came, I saw the drawer open. I didn't think it worth mentioning." "Perhaps it was," said Purbright gently. He examined the drawer, the key still in the lock, and the faintest trace of a scratch near the keyhole. "Did anyone borrow these keys?" "No one but me. He trusted me with the surgery. keys, not the cabinet ones. Purbright looked thoughtfully at the scratched lock, then at her hands, pale against her black dress. "You've been very helpful, Mrs. Larkin. One final question. Did the doctor receive many personal letters?" She stiffened slightly. "Not often. He wasn't what you'd call sociable. But there was one recently from London. He seemed bothered by it." "Do you happen to recall the name?" "It was a woman's, hard to read. Something with a C, Cray or Crane, perhaps." Purbright thanked her and stepped out into the drizzle. The clue was small, but in Flaxborough, small clues often led to disproportionately interesting people. At the station, Love was waiting with a file under his arm and the air of someone who had earned it. "Morning, sir. Got the chemist's delivery records." "And?" "The last bottle of concentrated extract was delivered here." He tapped the paper. "But there's something else. The same week, Mrs. Teetle collected a smaller order, same compound, same batch. For her greenhouse, apparently. She said it was for killing aphids." Purbright raised his eyebrows. "Ah, the civic-minded gardener. Did she mention which plants were so unwell?" "Roses, sir. The back garden's full of them." Purbright smiled thinly. "So the doctor and Mrs. Teetle both had access to the same poison, yet only one of them died from it. A botanical coincidence, perhaps? Or horticultural homicide?" Love chuckled, then stopped when he realized Purbright wasn't joking. That afternoon, Purbright called on the local undertaker, a soft-footed man named Jubb, who confirmed that Mrs. Teetle had already visited to arrange something tasteful for the memorial service. "Said she wished to ensure propriety," Jubb murmured, though between ourselves she spoke more like a hostess than a mourner. Purbright thanked him, then walked to the park, where Miss Dowse was sitting on a bench feeding pigeons with solemn attention. Her gloves, mauve again, fluttered like anxious wings. She looked up as he approached. "Oh, Inspector, I do wish you'd found whoever did it. I keep seeing his face. He was standing so close when it happened." "Miss Dowse," Purbright said kindly, "I don't suppose you noticed whether Mrs. Teetle poured the doctor's cup herself." She frowned in concentration. "It all happened so quickly, but I do remember. She took over from me at the urn for a few minutes. Said my hands were shaking too much and she'd do it properly. The doctor was right there, waiting for his tea. She even asked him if he wanted sugar." "Did he answer?" "Yes." He said, "No, thank you. Life's sweet enough as it is." Purbright gave a faint smile. An ironic fellow to the end. Miss Dowse blinked. "You mean?" "I mean," he said gently, "that irony sometimes has a dreadful sense of timing." He left her, there, the pigeons fluttering around her feet, and returned to the station. Love looked up expectantly. "Well, sir?" "Miss Dowse confirms our suspicion. Mrs. Teetle did pour the tea. The fatal cup, in all likelihood." Love leaned forward. "So that's it then. Motive, means, opportunity." But not necessity," said Purbright. "And that, love, is what separates gossip from guilt. We still lack a reason, something persuasive enough for a woman of her standing to gamble her entire reputation on one cup of tea." He turned to the window again, watching the rain thin into mist. "Somewhere in this town, a letter waits to be read, a letter that may explain why Dr. Hargreaves smiled before he died." Love frowned. "A letter, sir?" "Yes," said Purbright softly. "And when we find the writer of it, perhaps this mysterious Miss Crane, we may discover that our good doctor's death began long before the tea was poured." The postmaster's office in Flaxborough, a narrow room of varnished counters and vigilant silence, was never busier than when the town had something to whisper about. Inspector Purbright entered with his customary mild smile and an envelope in his breast pocket. Not to post, but to compare. Mrs. Teetle's account of the letter to Hargreaves had lingered in his thoughts all morning. He suspected the post might know more than its patrons ever realized. Miss Perks, the postmistress, greeted him with the reverent anxiety reserved for officials of uncertain rank. "Morning, Inspector. Don't tell me someone's stolen the collection box again." "Nothing so vulgar," Purbright replied pleasantly. "I wondered if you recall a letter arriving for Dr. Hargreaves last Thursday. London postmark, feminine hand. Possibly scented, though that may just be my imagination." Miss Perks adjusted her spectacles, her lips pursing into the shape of memory. "Oh, indeed, Inspector. I remember it. Cream envelope, foreign stamp. The handwriting had a flourish. I thought it looked theatrical. He collected it himself quite early. Before 10, I should say. Very abrupt he was." "Did he seem upset?" "Not upset exactly. Thoughtful. But he did tear the envelope as he opened it, right here at the counter, which struck me as wasteful for a man so tidy." Purbright inclined his head. "You are an observer of no small merit, Miss Perks. Would you happen to recall the sender's address?" "I saw Chelsea written in the corner, sir. No number I can remember, though." "That will do nicely." He thanked her and left, stepping into the damp, bright morning. The cobbles gleamed like old pewter. A London address, a woman's hand, and a doctor with secrets carefully shelved. The puzzle was aligning, though not yet comfortably. At the station, Sergeant Love was waiting with a report from the lab. "They found fingerprints on the bottle, sir, the small one, from his pocket. 2 clear sets. One matches the doctor, the other belongs to a woman. They're checking against our files, but I doubt she's a known criminal." "Doubtless not," said Purbright. "Flaxborough's guilty seldom require professional qualifications." He removed his hat and placed it neatly on the desk. "Have Constable Lovegrove take a discreet statement from Mrs. Teetle's maid. I should like to know whether her mistress received correspondence from London of late, or sent any." Love nodded, clearly itching to ask more. "You think she and the letter writer—" "I think," said Purbright, "that coincidence is the most suspicious thing in England." While Love busied himself, Purbright sat back and considered. The doctor had been a man of rigid privacy and professional rectitude. Such men, in his experience, were rarely without a concealed indulgence. The letter had agitated him, the poison had silenced him, and somewhere between the two events lay a motive polite enough to pass for an accident. By afternoon, Love returned, damp and triumphant. "The maid says Mrs. Teetle's been receiving parcels from London for weeks. Hats and gloves, mostly. All from a shop called Cray and Fenwick." Purbright's eyes brightened slightly. "Cray, you say? Our Mrs. Larkin thought the name Crane or Cray, and Fenwick sounds respectably mercantile enough to disguise anything. Shall I wire the shop, sir?" "No, Love. Let's telephone. It's easier to mislead the impatient." The call, when placed, yielded a brisk female voice. "Cray and Fenwick, millinery and accessories." "Inspector Purbright, Flaxborough Police. We're verifying a customer record. Do you have a Mrs. Teetle on your list?" A pause. "Indeed we do. She has an account. Small purchases. Gloves, scarves. Nothing unusual." "Ah. And might I trouble you? Miss Cray, I presume. To confirm whether you also corresponded with a Dr. Hargreaves of the same town." Another, longer pause, followed by a subtle change of tone. "I did, Inspector, though I can't see how that concerns your office." "It concerns me because he's recently deceased." Her voice thinned. "Dead?" "Quite, last Thursday." Silence, then a quiet exhale. "I see. He was once a friend of my family. I only wrote to tell him that a personal matter, a debt of sorts, had been settled." "I did not expect—" "Of course," Purbright interrupted gently. "And you have no further correspondence with anyone in Flaxborough?" "No one at all." He thanked her and replaced the receiver, his expression unreadable. "Well, Love," he said after a moment, "our Miss Cray sounds like a woman who's written many letters and regretted most of them, but she's not our poisoner. Her concern lay in money, not mortality. Love frowned. So we're back to Mrs. Teetle? Not necessarily. There's still Mrs. Larkin, and this mysterious switch of bottles. One wonders whether our efficient housekeeper found herself too indispensable for comfort, or too clever. They decided to visit her again that evening. The house looked lonelier now, the blinds drawn tight against the drizzle. Mrs. Larkin opened the door at once, as though she'd been listening for it. "I thought you'd come back," she said flatly. "You policemen always do when you think you're close." "Sometimes we come back because we're not," Purbright replied. "May we?" She led them to the study once more. The smell of polish and medicine lingered faintly. "I suppose you've heard about the letter," she said. Purbright regarded her with quiet interest. "I have indeed. Curious how far its echo travels." She smiled faintly, without humor. "He told me about it. Said it was from a woman who'd once meant something. He was furious. Said she'd made him a fool years ago. He burned it right after reading." "Burned it?" Purbright repeated. "But you said yesterday he left it unopened." "I said he had no time before he went out," she replied evenly. "He came back later. I was mistaken." Her calmness was too smooth, her eyes too bright. Purbright glanced at the hearth. Faint traces of ash still rested among the coals. He leaned closer, lifting a fragment with his pencil, a sliver of half-burnt paper, the curve of a letter visible. "See. Mrs. Larkin," he said softly. "Did you happen to refill the doctor's bottle before the tea?" She swallowed. "He asked me to, yes. Said he'd used the last of his tonic. And which bottle did you take the mixture from?" Her gaze flickered toward the cabinet. "The usual one." Purbright nodded slowly. "The usual one was not usual, I'm afraid. Someone had replaced it." The silence grew taut, like a thread about to break. Finally, she said, "I only did what I was told." "By whom?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "You wouldn't believe me if I said." "Try me," said Purbright. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. "It was Mrs. Teetle." Purbright gave no sign of surprise. "Indeed. And what reason did she offer for such assistance?" "She said the doctor had ruined her once. Long ago, before she married. That she only meant to make him sleep." Purbright exhaled softly. The drizzle against the window seemed suddenly louder. "Yes," he murmured. "Flaxborough has a talent for turning sleep into eternity." Purbright regarded Mrs. Larkin for a long while, his expression courteous but unreadable, the way a cat might look at a bird still deciding whether to fly. Love shifted uneasily beside him, the floorboards creaking as though echoing his discomfort. "You understand," Purbright said at last, "that this is a most serious statement. You're telling me Mrs. Teetle knowingly supplied a substance which led to the death of Dr. Hargreaves." Mrs. Larkin's hands twisted together, the knuckles pale as bone. "I'm telling you what she said, Inspector. She came here last Wednesday, uninvited, but very certain of herself. Said she'd brought new gloves from London for the doctor, that she wanted to leave them as a peace offering. But when he was called out, she stayed, waiting for him. I couldn't very well throw out the mayor's wife, could I?" Purbright smiled faintly. "Few people have managed that feat." "She talked," Mrs. Larkin went on, "as though the doctor and she had known each other years ago, before she was married. Said he'd treated her cruelly, made her out to be foolish. She asked me if he still used his nerve tonic. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people know he mixed his own medicines. Then she handed me a little vial, said it was a stronger version he'd asked her to bring. I told her I couldn't touch it, but she said he'd written for it from London." "Did she show you any letter?" Mrs. Larkin's eyes dropped. "No, sir. I didn't ask. She had that way of talking as if anything she said was already official." Purbright inclined his head slightly. "And so, when the doctor asked for his tonic the following morning, you refilled his bottle from hers?" I did, just a little, to make it up to the mark. Then she left, Purbright said softly, and the doctor carried the bottle to the benefactor's tea. The woman nodded miserably. If I'd thought, yes, Purbright said, but few of us think of murder until it's been tidily committed. He closed his notebook, his expression one of almost weary politeness. You understand, Mrs. Larkin, that we shall have to confirm your account with Mrs. Teetle. In the meantime, I suggest you remain available and, if possible, silent. Silence in Flaxborough is both rare and occasionally virtuous. When they stepped back into the street, dusk had already begun to collect in the gutters. Love walked beside his superior in uncharacteristic silence until curiosity overcame him. You believe her, sir? Purbright's eyes half closed against the wind. I believe that she believes herself. Whether that's the same thing is what we must decide. Seems clear enough, Love persisted. Mrs. Teetle had a grudge, got hold of the poison, and found someone obliging to do her work. That's motive and means both. True, said Purbright mildly, and yet simple answers have a way of arriving too early in Flaxborough. They seldom survive examination. They reached the corner where the lamps began to glow, soft, watery circles on the slick cobblestones. Purbright paused, his gaze following a figure across the square. Miss Dowse, carrying a shopping basket and looking over her shoulder with the anxiousness of one who lives too near her own conscience. Tell me, Love, he said, do you think Mrs. Teetle would risk her reputation, her husband's career, merely for revenge long cooled? Love scratched his head. Some women remember slights better than anniversaries. Indeed, Purbright said dryly, but she also knows how gossip ferments. If she wished the doctor dead, she'd have ensured the world believed him the author of his own end. That would be revenge worthy of her. He turned abruptly. Come, we'll pay her a courtesy call. They found Mrs. Teetle in her drawing room, arranging chrysanthemums with an air of fragile virtue. She greeted them with that strained graciousness reserved for guests who are socially unavoidable. Inspector, she said, placing a stem precisely in its vase, I do hope this is the last of it. The whole affair has been ghastly for everyone. My husband says the town can think of nothing else. Purbright's eyes twinkled. In Flaxborough, madam, thought and gossip are interchangeable terms. But no, I fear it isn't the last of it. Really, she sighed. Must it continue? I'm afraid so, he said pleasantly, particularly as it appears you were seen visiting Dr. Hargreaves the day before his death. The stem in her hand trembled before she steadied it. Nonsense. I did no such thing. Mrs. Larkin tells a different story. Her head came up sharply, a little too quickly. Mrs. Larkin is a nervous woman, Inspector. She'd misplace her own shadow and accuse the mirror. Yet she recalled you brought a vial for the doctor. A stronger version, she said. I never brought any such thing. The woman's unwell. Purbright smiled, faintly apologetic. That would be a pity, since her health seems rather crucial to your defense. You might wish to correct her account in writing, should you feel inclined. Mrs. Teetle's lips thinned to a single decisive line. I'll do nothing of the kind, and if you intend to make public such ridiculous allegations, I shall expect the chief constable himself to deal with it. Purbright bowed slightly. I dare say you shall, madam. He has a greater tolerance for indignation than I. As they left, Love exhaled. Well, that was as good as an admission. On the contrary, said Purbright, it was an improvement. A guilty woman would have protested too much. Mrs. Teetle protested just enough, like one playing her part for an audience already convinced of her innocence. They walked toward the station once more, the sound of rain beginning again, soft but steady. Still, Purbright added, half to himself, if Mrs. Larkin's story is true, we'll soon have proof. People who meddle with medicine always leave a trace, somewhere between the cork and their conscience. Love looked puzzled. Meaning what, sir? Meaning, Purbright said with a faint smile. "That tomorrow morning we'll ask the chemist how many bottles of digitalis, concentrate, were ordered last week, and whose handwriting appeared on the requisition." He glanced back toward the Teetle house, its windows glowing through the drizzle. "If I'm not mistaken, love, our murderer has a very tidy hand indeed." The following morning dawned clear and sharp, the kind of morning that made the town's chimneys look self-satisfied and the church clock sound rather more punctual than usual. Inspector Purbright, never one for haste but always one for timing, arrived at Blount's pharmacy shortly after opening. The bell above the door announced him with a polite tinkle that drew the chemist's head up from his ledger. "Inspector," Blount said, his tone civil but tinged with fatigue. "If it's about that blasted poison again, I assure you I've told you all I know." "Then this visit will be refreshingly brief," Purbright said pleasantly. "I only require a glance at your order book. Specifically, any purchases of digitalis, concentrate made in the last fortnight." Blount hesitated, a flicker no more, before pulling a heavy ledger from beneath the counter. "You're thorough, Inspector." "It saves one from being imaginative," Purbright murmured. He leafed through the pages until the familiar name appeared. Some Hargreaves, C. 1 bottle, ordered Monday. Beneath it, 2 lines down, another entry caught his eye. Teetle Mrs. A small quantity of the same. Purchased Wednesday afternoon. Purbright traced the entry lightly with his finger. "Ah, yes. For the roses." Blount's eyes darted up, wary. "So she said. I queried it. She snapped that her gardener was ignorant and she would handle it herself. Paid in cash." "Did she sign for it?" Blount looked faintly offended. "Naturally. My books would shame a monastery." He turned the ledger so Purbright could read the neat looping signature. M. Teetle. Purbright regarded it for several moments. The penmanship was immaculate, the loops precise, but there was something oddly familiar about the tilt of the letters. The same confident slant he had seen on a different page altogether. "Thank you, Mr. Blount. You've been most helpful, as always." "Do you mean to charge her?" Purbright smiled, faintly wistful. "Not yet. In Flaxborough, one does not arrest the mayor's wife without first confirming that one's hat is on straight." He left the shop with the calmness of a man pocketing a crucial but fragile truth. Outside, the town was already stirring. Shop blinds rising, voices echoing, bicycles wobbling down the street like thoughtful geese. Love was waiting by the car, his notebook open. "Well, sir?" "She bought it," Purbright said simply. "Signed for it, too. Her handwriting's quite unashamed. What interests me more is its resemblance to another piece of penmanship, namely, the requisition form for the doctor's medical supplies." Love frowned. "You mean she could have forged that order too?" "Possibly, or perhaps she merely lent her hand to a more intricate favor. Either way, she seems to have a talent for supplying others with what they ought not to have." They drove back to the station in companionable silence, the sound of the tires on wet road oddly soothing. Inside, Purbright spread both documents on his desk, the chemist's ledger copy and the requisition form recovered from Hargreaves's study. The similarities were undeniable. The same precise spacing, the same confident curl to the capital T. "Love," he said, "ask the constable to bring in Miss Dowse. Politely, mind. I've a question or two for her." When Miss Dowse arrived, she was carrying her handbag like a shield and looking perilously near tears. "I can't imagine what more you need from me, Inspector," she began. "I've told you everything. How he collapsed, how dreadful it was." "Yes," Purbright said kindly, "and you were very helpful. But I wonder, Miss Dowse, whether you might assist us in another small way. You've known Mrs. Teetle for some time, haven't you?" "Oh, yes. She's very particular. Always has to have the best seat at church, the first slice of cake, that sort of thing. But she does good work for the council." Indeed. And I suppose she occasionally enlisted your help with errands, perhaps asking you to deliver things or collect them. Miss Dowse looked alarmed. Well, sometimes. I mean, little things. She doesn't like being seen in shops where people might gossip. Quite understandable, Purbright murmured. Now, did she ask you to collect anything for her last Wednesday? From the chemist, perhaps? Her silence lengthened. Then, guiltily, she nodded. Yes, but it was only a small bottle. She said it was plant food. She even gave me the exact words to tell Mr. Blount so he wouldn't fuss. I didn't think it mattered. Purbright's tone remained mild. Did you notice whether she changed her gloves after returning from the hall that day? She did. She told me the old ones had got marked. Something about the tea urn leaking, but I didn't see any tea. Thank you, Miss Dowse. That will be all for now. When she'd gone, Love exhaled sharply. So Mrs. Teetle didn't even fetch the poison herself, sent the girl to do it. Clever. She'd have her alibi clean as her lace collar. Clever, Purbright agreed, but also arrogant. Those who delegate their sins always forget that their assistants talk more freely than their conscience ever will. He folded his hands, thinking. The chain was nearly complete. The purchase, the substitution, the death. And yet something still resisted finality. A faint misgiving, a shadow at the edge of logic. There's still the letter, he murmured. The one Mrs. Larkin swore was burned. A pity fire doesn't always finish its work. That evening, he returned once more to Hargreaves' house, alone. The study was just as they'd left it, the faint smell of medicine lingering in the air. He crouched by the hearth, poking gently among the ash. The fragment he'd taken earlier, the faint curve of a C, had been teasing him all day. Now, under the shifting grey residue, he found another piece, slightly larger, bearing the unmistakable flourish of the same hand. He placed it beside the first fragment and smiled thinly. The script matched the chemist's ledger entry exactly. The elegant C of Cray and of M. Teetle. So, he said softly to the empty room, our letter from London was written rather closer to home. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches, and in the distance, the church bell marked the hour. Purbright straightened, brushing ash from his sleeve. The truth, he reflected, was like digitalis itself, deadly in quantity, but curative in just the right dose. And he was very nearly ready to prescribe it. Purbright left the surgery in the deepening dusk, the sky bruised with cloud and the lamplight gleaming in puddles like melted brass. He walked without hurry, his umbrella tapping softly on the cobbles, a small rhythm to accompany thought. The fragments of paper in his pocket felt almost warm against his hand, as if they contained a pulse. Proof in Flaxborough never shouted. It merely waited to be understood. When he reached the police station, Love was at his desk, chewing on a pencil and the last of his patience. Evening, sir. I was just about to fetch you. The labs confirmed those bottle residues matched the same batch as the one Mrs. Teetle bought. Purbright placed his hat carefully on the peg. Then our gardener's tale of aphids becomes less botanical and more biographical. Love grinned, then frowned. You mean you're certain now? As certain as one can be before the subject admits it aloud, said Purbright, and even then, in this town, confessions tend to be less about remorse than convenience. He drew the fragments of letter from his pocket and laid them flat on the desk blotter. Our London correspondent, Miss Cray, appears to have been a local invention. These pieces match Mrs. Teetle's handwriting. She composed the letter, perhaps to remind Hargreaves of some past slight, or perhaps to prepare the ground for his fatal dose. Either way, it was bait. Love bent closer, squinting. So she wrote herself a letter, made it look like it came from this Miss Cray and sent it to the doctor. Precisely. A clever decoy. She'd have known it would stir him, send him to that tea simmering with nerves. Then all she had to do was ensure his bottle was conveniently doctored before he left home. The beauty of it, love, is that he carried his own execution with him. But what about Mrs. Larkin's part in it? Ah, Purbright murmured. Our housekeeper's guilt is of the useful kind. She was a tool, not a partner. She'll confirm the visit, but she didn't understand what was in that vial. Teetle's real triumph was knowing precisely how little truth people wish to believe when it concerns respectability. Love scratched his chin. Then she'll hang for it, sir. Purbright gave him a look that was not entirely approval. Not if she continues to act the penitent widow of a civic conscience. You underestimate how deeply Flaxborough's committees dislike scandal. They'd sooner believe the doctor poisoned himself out of vanity. Love looked troubled. Then how do we prove it? By making her contradict herself, said Purbright. Tomorrow morning, we shall invite Mrs. Teetle to give us the benefit of her clarity. I intend to let her tidy away her lies one by one until she finds herself without a handkerchief. He rose and turned to the window, where rain pressed faint fingers against the glass. You see, love, the real art of detection is not in discovering what people hide, but in giving them time enough to trip over what they've arranged too neatly. The next morning, the Teetles arrived together, though the invitation had been for one. Councillor Teetle's presence, heavy and florid, was explanation enough. He insisted upon accompanying his wife as a matter of dignity. Purbright, ever obliging, allowed it. The couple sat side by side in the interview room, she upright and composed, he restless, trying to appear untroubled by the damp smell of the police station. Mrs. Teetle, Purbright began, you were good enough to speak with us before, but a few small matters have since come to light. Small matters, she echoed faintly, clasping her handbag. How tedious for you. Quite the reverse, he said cheerfully. I enjoy tidiness. For instance, I now have proof that a certain letter sent to Dr. Hargreaves last week was not, as it seemed, from London, but from Flaxborough. Specifically from your own writing desk. Her eyes flickered, only once. I don't know what you mean. Nor do I expect you to. Yet. He withdrew the fragments of paper, flattened them, and pointed to the sweeping sea. You see, the hand is the same as the one that signed Mr. Blount's ledger. A very elegant hand, Mrs. Teetle. Her husband leaned forward, frowning. Are you accusing my wife of forgery, Inspector? Not at all, Purbright said smoothly. Forgery implies deceit for gain. I believe her motives were more domestic. Perhaps the letter was meant as a gentle reminder to the doctor. Something he'd rather forgotten. Mrs. Teetle's face remained pale and composed. That man tormented half the women in this town with his arrogance. If I wrote to him, it was only to request that he keep away from our committee. I didn't poison him, Inspector. I haven't the stomach for melodrama. Then you must forgive the evidence for suggesting otherwise. The digitalis that killed him was from the very batch you purchased. We even have the intermediary who fetched it. Miss Dowse, poor girl, who had no idea her errand would become infamous. For the first time, the mask slipped. Her lips parted in a quick, furious breath. That meddling creature, she had no business. Indeed, Purbright interrupted softly, and neither perhaps did you, madam. Councillor Teetle shifted uneasily. Now look here, Purbright. The inspector turned to him, his voice calm. You knew about your wife's visit to the doctor's house last Wednesday? My wife doesn't make secret visits, he snapped. Then she concealed this one admirably, said Purbright. Mrs. Larkin remembers it distinctly. She recalls your wife carrying a small vial, which she claimed was for the doctor. A touching act of reconciliation, no doubt. Mrs. Teetle's composure returned with startling speed. If that woman says so, she lies. I brought no vial. I wouldn't know one end of a bottle from another. Purbright leaned back, his tone now almost gentle. But you see, that's precisely what gives you away. Only someone familiar with the doctor's habits would know which bottle to alter, or how small a measure was needed to pass unnoticed. And who but a woman once close to him, one who'd known his methods, his pride, and his fondness for homemade cures, could have done that? A faint color crept into her cheeks, the first sign of heat beneath all that polish. You're implying something disgraceful. I'm implying only what your handwriting has already confessed, Purbright said quietly. The doctor's death was not a random misfortune. It was a conversation, long delayed, between you and him. For a moment, neither of the Teetles spoke. Then the counsellor's chair scraped back suddenly, his face ruddy with confusion and anger. This is monstrous. My wife has done nothing wrong. Purbright rose, signaling the interview's end. That will be for the coroner to decide, but I suspect, counsellor, that in the end your wife will claim what many guilty people in respectable houses have claimed before her, that she only meant to frighten him. Unfortunately, digitalis, like guilt, has no sense of moderation. He opened the door for them, his manner as polite as ever. The Teetles departed in silence, the counsellor's hand trembling slightly as he guided his wife out. Love looked at his superior, wide-eyed. Think she'll crack, sir? Purbright gave a small, tired smile. She already has, love. Only she doesn't know it yet. By the time her solicitor drafts her statement, she'll have remembered everything she's been trying to forget. He turned back toward his desk, the rain beginning again outside, steady and soft as a confession whispered too late. Purbright's prediction proved accurate sooner than even he might have wished. The following afternoon, a note was delivered to the police station, not written by Mrs. Teetle, but by her husband, whose large and self-important hand sprawled across the page like a man trying to conceal panic behind formality. He requested, in the name of propriety, a private word with the inspector to clarify certain misconceptions that have arisen from yesterday's regrettable interview. Purbright, reading it over tea, smiled faintly. You see, love, he said, Flaxborough confessions are often wrapped in apology. When a man wishes to clarify, he usually means to contradict his wife before she does herself. Counsellor Teetle arrived an hour later, his umbrella dripping indignantly into the hallway. His face, normally pink with municipal good health, looked grey and oily, as though the burden of righteousness had grown too heavy overnight. Inspector, he began without greeting, this matter has gone too far. You've allowed that housekeeper woman and that silly spinster to spread a tale that would disgrace the borough if repeated. My wife has been beside herself. Purbright gestured him toward the chair opposite his desk. I imagine so. Conscience, like indigestion, tends to disturb one's rest. Teetle frowned, unsure whether he'd been insulted. We've spoken about it. She admits she may have made a mistake, but she swears it was only meant to teach the doctor a lesson. A mild dose, she said, not enough to kill a cat. Yet enough to kill a man, Purbright observed. She's no murderess, Teetle protested, leaning forward, his voice cracking slightly. She told me he'd ruined her life once. Long before we married. I didn't know. She never said. It was something about an engagement he broke, some scandal hushed up. She said she only wanted him to know what it felt like to be frightened. She thought he'd fall ill, not die. Purbright folded his hands, the picture of judicial calm. A familiar refrain, counsellor. Many of our better citizens would happily dabble in fear if they could avoid the consequences. Teetle's hand trembled as he smoothed his hat. If I bring her to you, quietly, will you see that she's treated fairly? She'll be treated as fairly as truth allows, Purbright said, but I'd advise against coaching her. Genuine remorse is easier to identify than rehearsed innocence. That evening, Mrs. Teetle arrived alone. Her husband, she said, had gone to attend an emergency meeting of the council, which, Purbright thought, must surely be the first meeting in Flaxborough history held to discuss marital disaster rather than municipal drainage. She looked smaller somehow, the authority leached out of her by fatigue. Her gloved hands were clasped tightly, and her voice, when it came, was calm but brittle. "I did it," she said, "but not as you think. It wasn't poison I meant to give him, at least not enough to do harm. I'd had it from Blount before, a diluted version for the roses. It only stuns the pests. I thought it would make him weak for a while, just enough to frighten him, to make him remember me. He laughed at me, Inspector, 20 years ago, laughed in front of others, said I was a silly, sentimental girl. Then he went and married another woman, only to abandon her too. He made a joke of everyone he touched. I suppose I thought it was time he learned how sharp ridicule can be when swallowed." Purbright said nothing. The tick of the clock filled the room. She drew a long breath. "I mixed it into the tonic while Mrs. Larkin was in the kitchen. I told her it was from London, something new for his nerves. I didn't think she'd question it. I didn't mean to kill him. When he collapsed, I thought he was pretending. He always liked to make scenes." Purbright regarded her quietly. "I believe you, Mrs. Teetle, in part. But you knew what you were giving him. You knew digitalis, even in small doses, could stop the heart. That was the lesson you chose." Her eyes met his, bright and brittle. "Then I've learned it too." He nodded slowly. "Regret, like medicine, works best when taken before it's needed." When she left, love entered, pale and wide-eyed. "That's it then, sir. She's confessed." "In her way," Purbright said. "Though she prefers to call it an explanation, we shall still need to verify the quantities. Perhaps she's telling the truth about intending only to frighten him, but it changes little." Love hesitated. "Do you think the counselor knew?" "I think he does now. And he'll make it his life's work to turn her sin into civic tragedy. You'll see the next edition of the Flaxborough Gazette, Grief of Public Servant's Wife, or something equally genteel." That night, rain returned, slow and heavy, tapping at the windows of the station as if to remind them that Flaxborough preferred its scandals washed clean. Purbright sat alone at his desk, reading over his notes, each line a thread drawn taut toward the same inevitable knot. Mrs. Teetle's motives were no grander than wounded vanity, her method no more inventive than opportunity and nerve. Yet in that quiet, he found himself oddly melancholy. There was something pitiful in how small her triumph had been, and how completely it had destroyed her. He poured himself a cup of tea from the chipped pot on the sideboard and stared at the steam. Love, returning from a brief errand, paused at the door. "You all right, sir?" "Perfectly," Purbright said, only reflecting that crimes of passion, when they appear in respectable homes, are like mildew in wallpaper, hidden too long to scrape clean. Love frowned. "You think she'll go to prison?" "She will," Purbright said, "but not for as long as she'll spend imprisoned in her own drawing-room among the chrysanthemums she arranged for appearances." He set down the cup and smiled faintly. "Now then, love, tomorrow we'll tidy the paperwork. Death may be sudden, but the forms never are." Outside, the rain eased to a whisper. Across town, lights were going out one by one, as though the whole of Flaxborough were preparing to forget. But Purbright, who understood that forgetting was the town's favorite form of forgiveness, remained awake, his lamp casting a small circle of reason against the dark. Somewhere beyond it, Mrs. Teetle was sitting very still, waiting for the knock she already knew would come with morning. Inspector Purbright was never one for theatrical endings. Even when truth arrived, it tended to do so quietly. Like an uninvited guest who had simply walked through an unlocked door and found everyone too polite to object. The following morning, Flaxborough woke to the soft shock of news. Mrs. Mabel Teetle, wife of Councillor Ernest Teetle, had been taken into custody. Not with handcuffs, nor the satisfaction of public spectacle, but under the modest heading of further inquiries. The Gazette called it a distressing development for one of the town's most beloved civic figures. In the chief constable's office, the confession lay typed and signed, brief, remorseful, and meticulously phrased. Mrs. Teetle had acted without full comprehension of the danger, intending only to administer a small, harmless punishment. The phrasing, Purbright thought, bore the marks of both her solicitor and her vanity. Yet it would serve. The coroner would call it manslaughter, and the newspapers would call it tragedy. Love entered with a cup of tea, looking both relieved and uncertain. "So that's it then, sir. She's admitted it proper. No tricks left." Purbright nodded, though his gaze lingered on the grey drizzle beyond the window. "No tricks, no. Only the ordinary human ones. Self-justification, pride, and the last-minute hope that a moral intention can excuse a mortal result." He took the cup absently. "You've been in Flaxborough long enough, love, to know that people here seldom mean the harm they cause. They simply prefer to cause it neatly." Love shifted. Still seemed strange, though. All that fuss over something from 20 years ago. "Time doesn't dilute humiliation," Purbright said softly. "It only distills it." There was a knock, and the door opened to reveal Mr. Blount, the chemist, his manner subdued but not altogether displeased. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "Terrible business. I knew that woman was trouble, far too decisive for her own good." "Your professional caution is noted," Purbright said mildly. "I imagine her account will make excellent reading for your trade journal." Blount flushed. "I merely wanted to offer the evidence of my ledger, should it be required." "It has already performed admirably," Purbright replied. "But thank you for your civic spirit. In Flaxborough, it's a rare but well-preserved specimen." When the chemist had gone, Love leaned closer. "What'll happen to her, sir?" "She'll stand trial, and her husband will stand beside her in the photographs," Purbright said. "He'll insist she was fragile, misunderstood, perhaps misled. It will be the finest speech of his career." He rose, adjusting his coat, the motion unhurried as always. "Come, love. There's a small matter to conclude." They drove through the rain-slick streets to the Memorial Hall, the scene, now tidied, of the doctor's last performance. The tables had been folded away, the floor polished, and only the faint, sour trace of old tea lingered. Purbright walked slowly across the boards, stopping near the spot where Hargreaves had fallen. "Funny, isn't it?" Love murmured. "How everything looks ordinary again." "Ordinary," Purbright repeated. "Yes, that's the real danger of Flaxborough. Its relentless ability to resume respectability." He bent down and touched the wood where a faint stain remained. "Yet somewhere in that stain," he said, "lies a lesson Mrs. Teetle won't appreciate. The smallest act, properly measured, can alter the course of several lives. Hers, her husband's, Mrs. Larkin's, Miss Dowse's. Even yours, love, if you've been paying attention." Love smiled uncertainly. "I have, sir, though I hope I never get to use what I've learned." "That's the spirit of a true policeman," Purbright said, straightening. "One who learns from other people's folly while quietly expecting more to arrive." Later that evening in his office, Purbright wrote his final report. His prose was plain, the sentences modest. He ended not with accusation, but observation. The motive, though personal, was consistent with the town's pattern of civility, concealing resentment. Mrs. Teetle sought to correct a memory and instead created a scandal. Her remorse is genuine but irrelevant. The cause, as ever, was pride disguised as virtue. He laid down his pen, read the report once, and smiled faintly at its dull precision. "The truth," he murmured, "is always a little disappointing when written down." Outside, the bells struck 6. Somewhere across town, Councillor Teetle was likely rehearsing a statement for the press, one that would describe his wife's actions as a moment of uncharacteristic weakness and his own as a period of loyal suffering. Miss Dowse would be telling a new version of events to the vicar's wife, each retelling a little more vivid. Mrs. Larkin, free at last from suspicion, would be scrubbing the doctor's old desk and muttering that men of science brought nothing but trouble. Purbright reached for his hat. "Flaxborough will forget soon enough," he said to no one in particular. "It's remarkably efficient at that." He paused at the door, switched off the lamp, and let the darkness reclaim the office. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the lamps. Calm again, as though nothing had ever happened. Purbright stepped out into the night, his figure unhurried, blending with the quiet order of the town that would, by morning, have restored its routines and gossip. He turned once toward the square, where the clock tower stood against the thinning mist. "Until next time," he murmured, and began the slow walk home, his umbrella tapping in steady rhythm with his thoughts.